Aloha, everybody. As I noticed you folks working on the assignments for the coding standards module, I thought, I wonder if folks really understand the difference between JavaScript on the client versus the server side. And so I thought it would be cool to kind of quickly go through illustrating how JavaScript can run on the server versus JavaScript on the client, and a little bit about the similarities and differences, because it is kind of confusing actually if you come from a Java or C++ background where you don't have this difference between client and server side. So in the learning experiences, every time we do these experiences, we set up a GitHub repo, we create an IntelliJ JavaScript project, and we download the coding standards, and then we create files and so forth, and functions. And so I built a little sample GitHub repo that you'll be able to download. And I'm going to show it here. And all I've done at this point is just simply follow the directions for, installing the ESLint, the gitignore, and the package.json from the standard. So I haven't written any code yet, but I didn't want to waste time going through all that stuff with you. So here's the repo. It's kind of all set up. And one of the things they say to do is we create the standard JavaScript project, and then you create a JS file. So we could say something like new file, or even to be better, I guess more, we could say new JavaScript file, although I don't quite understand exactly what this gives us, but we can do it anyway. We can say sample.js. And then inside there we can do something super simple like say console.log foo, right? There's the ultimate, the most simple kind of JavaScript file you can have. And so one thing we might want to do is run it. Now you've maybe noticed that there is this run menu in IntelliJ. So let's just say that we, say run, what the heck, and see what's going to happen, okay? Well, what happens when we do run is we invoke this command, user local bin node, and then the actual file, okay? And I will back up and say I did an npm install prior to this so that the node modules directory exists. And notice that node is here on the command line, and then there's this crazy directory called node modules. Well, what does that mean? Well, what it ultimately means is that when you run node, it will look for a node modules directory where it can find libraries and so forth, and then use those libraries when you actually run your program. Okay, now in this case we're just using the built-in console.log statement, so it doesn't really matter about the libraries we have. We actually don't really even need any of them. But notice that we get foo printed out, okay, on the command line. And here's an example of running JavaScript on the server side. Okay, so on your laptop, there is a program called Node, which is basically a way to run JavaScript on the server or on a laptop. Okay, just like you'd run Java or just like you'd run C++. Node is kind of, it's not a compiler really, but you can, for the time being, maybe think, oh, Node is like a compiler for JavaScript. And so I can type the node command just like I might type the Java C command or the Java command, and I get to run my program. Okay, but so this is the server side, but that wasn't exactly what the instructions in your experiences told you to do. It didn't tell you to do that run command. It told you something else, and what it told you to do was to say new HTML file called something like index.html. And then it told you to create a script inside there, okay, which I'll try to type out kind of unsuccessfully. Sample.js. Okay. And then it says, okay, find this little Chrome icon and click it. Okay, and when we do that and we look at the console, we see our foo over there. Okay, so here's the thing. when we go through those additional steps, we're saying don't run your JavaScript code through the Node program that's installed on your laptop. Instead, run the sample.js program through the JavaScript, execution environment that's embedded in every single browser, modern browser on the planet. Okay? And the way we get to access that JavaScript environment, which is embedded in every browser on the planet in some shape or form, is by creating an index.html file that loads JavaScript as a script, and then by trying to load that index.html inside a browser, we load and execute that JavaScript. Okay, so this is what we can think of as client-side JavaScript execution rather than server-side JavaScript execution, where server-side is basically running the Node program on a laptop. So client-side is exactly the same as browser-based JavaScript execution. Server-side is equivalent to using the Node program, to run JavaScript code. All right, well, okay, so that's all well and dandy, but the life gets a little more complicated when you're not just using the built-in JavaScript commands. What if you wanted to use a library like underscore? Okay, so let's say we wanted to do in our sample.js, let's say we wanted to say underscore.map, one of my top 3 functions of all time. 1, 2, 3, we pass it this, and then we have like a num goes to console.log of num. Okay, let's say we wanted to invoke the underscore function. Okay, so if we had that in here, and we go back to our index.html and we try to run this inside the browser. Okay, so I'll just click here. What we can see, the browser is quickly going to say, dude, I don't know what about this underscore function. Okay, that I don't know about that underscore symbol even that you talked about. It's not defined, right? So how do we fix this? Okay, so we know how to fix this on the client side. We have to load that script, and we have to load it before we load the JavaScript, our sample.js file. So we load this script first, which is going to effectively define that underscore symbol as being bound to the underscore library. And then we can run our sample.js and things should work. So let's see what happens if we do that. We'll click on this, and yeah, we get our foo, and then we have our map function work. Okay, so the way that on the client side within a browser, essentially the way things work is we use this header environment to load a bunch of JavaScript files, including library files, into our JavaScript execution environment within each browser within each browser of all browsers on the planet. And once we've loaded all our libraries, then we can actually load our code, and it runs within that browser-based environment. Okay? So that's essentially the client side way. Now let's go back to our server side thing. Okay, now we've got our underscore function, and we want to say, let's just try. All right, so if we do run, same thing as we did before. Okay, well, problems, right? Actually, the exact same problem. Reference area, underscore is not defined. Okay, so when we try to run node, right, on the server side, on our laptop with this file, we get foo printed out, and then it says, you know what, I don't understand what an underscore is. I cannot help you. Here's the error. So the question is, we know on the client side that the way that we define libraries is via this script thing. How do we do it when we want to run something on the server side? Okay, so we'll get to this later in the semester, but I kind of wanted to show you just conceptually what's going on here. And the way you can do it is you can define the library as a dependency in your package.json. I know you guys haven't even seen package.json. You've just loaded it in and said, I don't even know what the heck that is doing. What's that? I'll tell you what it's doing, right? What it's doing is it's telling your node environment on your laptop about the libraries that should exist, okay, in order to run the JavaScript correctly. And by the way, remember the reason why I had you do it was so that ESLint would be defined and available for use as you ran your programs. Okay, so this is the place where we're making ESLint and the versions of it that we want and so forth accessible to IntelliJ. Okay, because IntelliJ is actually using this information to figure out how it's going to run stuff. And in fact, it runs Node under the hood in order to do ESLint. All right, anyway, but what we want right now is underscore. So it turns out that we use this crazy syntax, which we won't worry about, but the result being is that now this makes underscore available in our environment. And it turns out that node modules, because I did this previously, okay, has underscore in here. Okay, see, it's right there. Otherwise, it would say, do you want to run npm install, okay, to make sure that package is available. All right, so IntelliJ didn't ask us to do it, but you might see, when you kind of redo these steps, you might see that come up. All right, so now in our node modules directory, we have this library. This package.json says, by the way, underscore is available right here. What the heck is that? Holy smokes. Let's now try to run our sample.js. Okay, so we'll go run, right? Should be good. Let's see, run sample.js. No bueno. Okay, still saying underscore is not defined. Okay, well that's irritating because it is in our node modules directory. The reason that it keeps saying this is because we need in our JavaScript code to explicitly tell the JavaScript runtime environment, well, what systems in that library, in that node modules directory, do I really need for this specific piece of code? And the way we do that, one way to do it, there's a lot of ways to do it, but I'll show you kind of the simplest way to do it, okay, is via require statement. So what we're going to say is we're going to define that symbol, underscore, to be the result of loading the underscore library, which is located in node modules. All right. And now, finally, hopefully, if we say run, okay, we now get our foo and we get our underscore function to run, which prints out 1, 2, 3. Okay? So, you know, this idea that JavaScript can run inside browsers or run, you know, on your local development, on your local hardware, just like, you know, you run Java or C++ or whatever on your local hardware. You know, this is one of kind of the peculiar tricks that's actually, you know, in a sense, only JavaScript has this property that it exists on every browser in the world, at least in some version, you know, and that creates incredible opportunities, right? But it also means that you've got to be a little more thoughtful, and actually code starts to get written slightly differently depending upon, you know, where it wants to be executed. Now, there's a lot of, you know, kind of commotion and volatility in the JavaScript build, you know, space. Okay, because everybody's trying to figure out, like, how do we make it so that things could run on the server, run on the client, the programmer doesn't have to worry about that, we don't need these crazy require statements, you know, all that kind of thing. Like, how can we get rid of those distinctions and push that all underneath the hood? Lots of different ways that can happen. And, you know, which one is best depends on, you know, kind of what kind of requirements you're optimizing for. But I wanted to at least help you in this video understand there are two different execution environments. And one is the client side, where every browser has a built-in JavaScript interpreter. And then the other is the server side, where there is this program called Node, which can run which is designed to run JavaScript on the server side. All right, hope this helps. See you soon.